Hello, this is Seraphim, and today I bring you a new original story on my channel about justice, hidden truths, and lives that change when karma finally arrives. The billionaire sat in the hotel lobby at 2 in the morning, staring at an employee file he had pulled from the front desk computer. His hands would not stop shaking. The name on the file read Marcus James Cole. Date of birth, March 14, 2003. Place of birth, Detroit, Michigan. Mother's name, Denise Elaine Cole. The billionaire's mouth went dry, and a sound came out of his throat that was not quite a word and not quite a cry. It was the sound of a man who had spent 23 years mourning a ghost who was alive, parking cars 50 feet from where he sat. But let me start from the beginning, because this story did not begin in a hotel lobby. It began in fire, in loss, and in a lie that held together for over 2 decades. Marcus Cole woke up every morning at 4:45. Not because he wanted to. Not because he was one of those people who loved the sunrise and the quiet of the early hours. He woke up at 4:45 because the number 7 bus to downtown ran at 5:22. And if he missed it, the next one did not come until 6:15. And if he caught the 6:15, he would be late for his shift. And if he was late for his shift, Mr. Pratt would write him up. And if Mr. Pratt wrote him up one more time, Marcus would lose the only job that kept a roof over his head. So 4:45 it was. Every single day. No alarm clock needed. His body had learned the rhythm of survival a long time ago. His apartment, if you could call it that, sat on the 3rd floor of a building on Myrtle Avenue that smelled like boiled cabbage and old carpet. 1 room, a hot plate, a bathroom down the hall that he shared with 3 other tenants. The walls were thin enough to hear Mr. Deacon on one side coughing through the night, and Mrs. Patterson on the other side, watching her television programs until midnight. Marcus did not complain. He had lived in worse. Much worse. He had lived in places where the walls were not walls at all, just curtains hung between beds in rooms full of children who were not his brothers or sisters. The foster care system had raised Marcus, if you could call it raising, 12 homes in 18 years. Some were decent. Mrs. Abernathy in the 3rd home used to make cornbread on Sundays and let him sit in the kitchen while she cooked. She would hum gospel songs and pat his head when she walked by, and for 3 months, Marcus thought maybe this was what it felt like to have a mother. Then her husband got transferred to another state, and Marcus went back into the system like a library book returned to the shelf. No goodbye party, no forwarding address, just a social worker with a manila folder and a tired smile. Other homes were not decent at all. The Hendersons kept 5 foster children and spent the government checks on things that had nothing to do with children. Marcus learned to make a meal out of saltine crackers and peanut butter. He learned to sleep with one eye open. He learned that when Mr. Henderson came home smelling like whiskey and speaking too loud, the smartest thing to do was to become invisible. To fold yourself into a corner and breathe so quietly that nobody remembered you were there. That was a skill Marcus carried into adulthood, the ability to disappear, to take up no more space than absolutely necessary. By the time he aged out of the system at 18, Marcus had no family, no savings, and no plan. What he had was a GED he had earned by studying at the public library, a duffel bag with 2 changes of clothes, and a stubbornness that refused to let him lie down and quit. He worked at a car wash for a year, then a warehouse, then a grocery store where the manager screamed at employees like they were dogs. Marcus endured it all with the same quiet patience that had gotten him through 12 foster homes. He did not fight. He did not argue. He showed up. He did the work. He went home. The job at the Grand Monarch Hotel came through a temp agency. They needed valets for the holiday season, and Marcus had a clean driving record and a calm temperament. The hotel sat on the corner of Lexington and 44th in Manhattan, a tower of glass and marble that catered to the kind of people who spent more on a single night's stay than Marcus earned in a month. The lobby had chandeliers that looked like frozen waterfalls. The floors were polished so bright you could see your reflection walking toward you. The air smelled like fresh flowers and expensive cologne. Marcus had never been inside a building like this in his life. He took to the job immediately. There was something about cars that Marcus understood. He had taught himself basic mechanics at the Henderson house by reading a manual he found in the garage. Cars made sense to him. They were logical. You put in the right fuel, you maintained the engine, you treated them with respect, and they ran. People were not like that. People were unpredictable and often cruel. But cars were honest machines. When Marcus slid behind the wheel of a Mercedes or a Bentley, he felt something close to joy. Not ownership. He knew these machines would never be his. But the simple pleasure of feeling a perfectly tuned engine respond to his touch, of guiding something beautiful and powerful through the parking structure with precision and care. That was enough. Mr. Pratt, the valet manager, was a short man with a thin mustache and a clipboard he carried like a weapon. He had been managing the valet team for 11 years and had developed the personality of a man who believed his position made him important. He was not cruel exactly, but he was the kind of boss who reminded you every day that you were replaceable. He called the valets by their last names. He docked pay for scuffed shoes. He posted the schedule on Monday mornings and changed it on Tuesday afternoons just to see who was paying attention. Marcus navigated Mr. Pratt the same way he had navigated every difficult authority figure in his life. With silence, compliance, and the understanding that this man held a small amount of power and needed to feel it every day. Marcus said yes, sir, and no, sir. He polished his shoes until they shone. He memorized the schedule and checked it twice a day. He never called in sick. He never complained. After 4 months, the temp position became permanent, and Marcus allowed himself a rare moment of something that felt like pride. He had a real job. A name tag. A locker with a combination lock. It was not much, but it was his. The other valets were a mixed crew. There was Deshaun, who was saving money for community college and talked about becoming an engineer the way some people talk about winning the lottery, with hope so bright it almost hurt to look at. There was Eddie, who had been parking cars for 6 years and had developed a philosophy that this was as good as it was going to get, so why stress about it? There was Rosa, the only woman on the team, who was faster than all of them and never let them forget it. And there was Tony, who was always scheming about something, always whispering about side hustles and easy money, always looking at the guests' belongings with eyes that lingered a beat too long. Marcus kept a polite distance from most of them. He liked Deshaun. They sometimes ate lunch together on the bench behind the parking structure, sharing whatever they had brought from home. Deshaun would talk about circuits and wiring and the physics of bridge construction, and Marcus would listen with genuine interest because he admired anyone who had a dream and was chasing it with both hands. Marcus did not have a dream himself, or rather, his dream was so simple it barely qualified. He wanted stability, a place to live that did not shake when trucks went by, a savings account with more than $200 in it, maybe someday a car of his own. Nothing fancy, just something reliable. On the evening of October 17th, a Thursday, a black Rolls-Royce Phantom pulled up to the hotel entrance at exactly 8:42. Marcus was stationed at the front, and he stepped forward with the usual greeting he gave every guest. "Good evening, sir. Welcome to the Grand Monarch." He opened the driver's door and waited. The man who stepped out was tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a charcoal suit that fit him like it had been sewn onto his body. His shoes alone probably cost more than everything Marcus owned combined. His watch caught the light from the hotel entrance and threw tiny sparks into the night air. His face was hard, clean-shaven, with deep lines around the mouth that suggested a man who did not smile often and did not suffer fools at all. Marcus recognized wealth. After months of working at the Grand Monarch, he could tell the difference between the merely rich and the truly powerful. The merely rich were often loud. They wanted you to notice them. They wanted you to see the car, the watch, the woman on their arm. The truly powerful were quiet. They moved through space like they owned it, because they often did. This man was the second kind. He did not look at Marcus when he stepped out. He adjusted his cufflinks. He buttoned his jacket. Then he reached into the car, pulled out a set of keys, and threw them at Marcus. Not tossed, Not handed, through. The keys hit Marcus on the left cheekbone, just below the eye. The metal edge of a key cut a small line into his skin. Marcus felt the sting, felt the warm trickle of something that might have been blood, and caught the keys on the bounce before they hit the ground. His reflexes were good. You develop good reflexes when you grow up catching whatever life throws at you, and life had thrown much harder things than car keys. "Try not to scratch it, boy," the man said without looking at him. His voice was flat, almost bored, as if throwing keys at another human being's face was something he did between checking emails and ordering dinner. He turned and walked into the hotel lobby, and the glass doors closed behind him like the curtain falling on a scene that had already been forgotten by the only person in it who mattered. Marcus stood there for a moment. The cut on his cheek burned. The keys were warm in his palm, pressed tight against his skin. He could feel his pulse in his fingertips. Something hot rose in his chest, something old and familiar, something he had spent his whole life learning to press down and hold under the surface. Anger. Not the explosive kind. Marcus did not do explosive. His was the slow-burning kind, the kind that sits in your ribs like a coal and stays hot for hours. He breathed through it, in through the nose, out through the mouth. The way Mrs. Abernathy had taught him when he was 7 years old and furious at the world for reasons he could not yet name. Mr. Pratt appeared at the valet stand. He had seen the whole thing. Marcus knew this because Mr. Pratt's eyes flicked to the cut on Marcus's cheek and then flicked away. The way a man looks at a traffic accident and decides it is none of his business. "That's Mr. Whitfield," Pratt said, consulting his clipboard as if the information on it was more important than the blood on Marcus's face. "Victor Whitfield, penthouse suite, 3-night stay. Make sure that car is spotless when he asks for it. And Marcus," he added, lowering his voice to what he probably thought was a confidential tone, "don't make this into a thing." "A thing," Marcus repeated, his voice quiet and even. He could feel the cut stiffening as the blood began to dry. A thin line of red ran down toward his jaw. He did not wipe it. He just stood there, holding the keys to a car that cost more than he would earn in 20 years, and looked at Mr. Pratt with an expression so calm it made the manager shift his weight from one foot to the other. "You know what I mean," Pratt said, not meeting his eyes. "He's a VIP. Whitfield Capital. The man is worth billions, with a B. We don't make waves with guests like that. We smile. We say, 'Yes, sir.' We park the car. That's the job." He paused, and then, as if offering a consolation prize, he added, "There's a first aid kit in the break room. Clean that up before the next guest sees it." Marcus nodded once. He turned and walked toward the Rolls-Royce. The leather interior smelled like cedar and something else, something warm and woody that Marcus could not identify, but that spoke of a life so far removed from his own, it might as well have been another planet. He adjusted the seat, checked the mirrors, and drove the car down into the parking structure with the same care he gave every vehicle. He parked it in the VIP section, pulled a handbrake, and sat for a moment in the silence. The dashboard glowed softly. The seat was heated. For 30 seconds, Marcus allowed himself to exist in this tiny pocket of luxury. And then he got out, locked the door, and went to the break room to put a bandage on his face. The break room was empty. Marcus ran cold water over a paper towel and pressed it to the cut. It was not deep, but it would leave a mark for a few days. He looked at himself in the small mirror above the sink. 23 years old, brown skin, close-cropped hair, a face that people described as serious, which was a polite way of saying he did not smile much. The bandage went on straight. He smoothed his uniform, checked his shoes, and went back to work. There were more cars to park, more keys to catch, more sir and ma'am to distribute among people who would never remember his name. Deshawn found him on the bench during their break. "I heard what happened," Deshawn said, unwrapping a ham sandwich and tearing it in half without being asked. He held out the bigger piece to Marcus. "Tony told me. Said that dude straight up threw his keys at your face like you were a dartboard. That's messed up, man. That is seriously messed up." Marcus took the sandwich half and bit into it. The bread was soft, the ham was thin, and it was the best thing he had tasted all day. "It's not the first time somebody threw something at me," he said, which was true, and also the kind of sentence that made Deshawn go quiet for a moment because he understood what it meant without needing it explained. "You should report it," Deshawn said after a while. "That's assault. He cut your face. You're bleeding. There are cameras. You could file a complaint." He said this with the earnest conviction of someone who still believed the system worked, and Marcus did not have it in him to explain all the reasons why it did not, at least not for people who looked like them, standing in uniforms that cost $19 at a discount store, accusing billionaires of anything at all. "Pratt saw the whole thing," Marcus said. "He told me not to make it into a thing." Exact words. He took another bite of the sandwich and chewed slowly. His jaw ached where the key had hit. "The man is worth billions with a B." Pratt said that like it was supposed to explain everything. And maybe it does. Maybe when you have that much money, people are just targets you throw things at. I don't know. I just know I need this job. Deshawn shook his head slowly, the way people do when they are angry on someone else's behalf and cannot do anything about it. "It's not right," he said. "None of it is right. You're a better man than me, Marcus. If somebody threw keys at my face, I'd be in handcuffs right now, and that Rolls-Royce would have a new hood ornament shaped like my fist." Marcus almost smiled at that. Almost. The corner of his mouth twitched, which was as close as he usually got. They finished their sandwiches in comfortable silence, and then they went back to work, and the night continued the way nights at the Grand Monarch always did, with expensive cars and expensive people and the quiet machinery of service that kept the whole operation running. It was nearly midnight when Marcus went to pull a car for a departing guest and noticed something wrong with the Rolls-Royce. Not wrong with the car itself. The Phantom sat in its VIP spot exactly where he had left it, gleaming under the fluorescent lights of the parking structure like a sleeping panther. What was wrong was that the rear passenger door was slightly open. Not wide open, just cracked, maybe half an inch, the way a door sits when it has not been pulled shut with enough force to engage the latch. The interior light was off, which meant the car's automatic system had timed out, but the door was definitely not fully closed. Marcus approached the car carefully. He had not touched the rear doors when he parked it. He was certain of this because he only ever adjusted the driver's seat and mirrors. He never went through a guest's car, never opened the glove box, never checked the back seat. This was not a written rule. It was his own rule, born from years of learning that touching things that did not belong to you was the fastest way to get accused of stealing them. He pulled the rear door open just enough to check that nothing was falling out, and that is when he saw the briefcase. It was sitting on the back seat, dark brown leather with brass clasps, the kind of briefcase that looked like it had been handmade by someone who took their craft very seriously. It was not latched. The top was slightly open, and Marcus could see the edges of papers inside. Manila folders, printed documents, the corner of something that looked like a legal contract, thick and bound with a blue cover. His first instinct was to close the door and walk away. His second instinct, which arrived half a breath later, was to call the front desk and report it. His third instinct, the one that sat deeper than the others and spoke in a quieter voice, was simple curiosity. What kind of documents did a man like Victor Whitfield carry in a briefcase that he left in an unlocked car? Marcus stood there for exactly 4 seconds. He counted them. 1, 2, 3, 4. Then he closed the rear door firmly until the latch clicked, walked to the valet stand, picked up the internal phone, and called the front desk. "This is Marcus in Valet," he said. "There's a briefcase in the back seat of the Rolls-Royce Phantom in VIP Spot 7. Mr. Whitfield's vehicle. The rear door was not fully closed. I secured the door but did not touch the briefcase. Just wanted to log it in case the guest asks." The front desk attendant, a woman named Clarice, who had worked at the Grand Monarch for 15 years and had seen everything twice, thanked him in a professional tone and made a note. Marcus hung up the phone and went back to work. He did not think about the briefcase again. He did not think about what was inside it. He did not think about the fact that a man who threw keys at people's faces probably kept secrets in his briefcase that could ruin lives or make fortunes. Marcus had learned a long time ago that other people's business was a locked room, and the smartest thing you could do was walk past the door without looking through the keyhole. What Marcus did not know, what he could not possibly have known, was that Victor Whitfield was watching. Not personally, not with his own eyes, but through a system that was far more deliberate than a forgotten briefcase and an unlatched door. Victor Whitfield had not forgotten anything. Victor Whitfield never forgot anything. The briefcase, the unlocked door, the visible documents, all of it was engineered, designed, placed with the precision of a man who had built a $12 billion empire by understanding exactly how people behaved when they thought nobody was watching. Victor Whitfield sat in his penthouse suite on the 42nd floor, his jacket removed, his sleeves rolled to the elbow, a glass of bourbon on the table beside him that he had not touched. In front of him was a laptop showing 4 camera feeds from the parking structure. He had requested the feeds from hotel security 3 days ago, citing concerns about vehicle safety, and the hotel manager had provided them immediately, because when a man who is worth $12 billion asks for camera feeds, you do not ask why. You say, "Yes, sir," and you provide the feeds. This was the 4th hotel Victor had visited in the past 2 months with the same setup. The briefcase, the unlocked door, the documents visible enough to tempt anyone with a pulse and a pair of hands. He was looking for something specific, and he had not found it yet. In Chicago, a valet had opened the briefcase, photographed 3 documents with his phone, and closed it again, all within 90 seconds. In Miami, a valet had taken the briefcase to the break room, rifled through every page, and returned it to the car 20 minutes later with the papers in a slightly different order. In Dallas, a valet had not opened the briefcase, but had called a friend to brag about what he had seen through the gap in the lid, describing details that proved he had leaned in close enough to read. Victor Whitfield was not testing these valets because he was paranoid about his briefcase. He was testing them because he was about to make the largest acquisition of his career, a hostile takeover of a telecommunications giant called Meridian Corp, and the success of that takeover depended on absolute secrecy until the moment of execution. The documents in that briefcase were real. They contained board resolutions, proxy statements, financing agreements, and a timeline that, if leaked to the wrong person, would trigger a market reaction that could cost him hundreds of millions of dollars. Victor needed to know who could be trusted. Not trusted with a handshake and a promise, anyone could manage that. Trusted with access. Trusted with proximity to power. Trusted in the dark, when nobody was looking and nobody would ever know. He watched the footage of Marcus approaching the car. He watched the young man notice the open door, pause, open it slightly wider, see the briefcase, and then, after a moment of stillness that lasted exactly 4 seconds, close the door and walk away. Victor rewound the footage. He watched it again. He zoomed in on Marcus's hands. They did not reach toward the briefcase. They did not hover. They did not twitch with the temptation that every other valet in every other city had shown. The young man simply saw something that was not his, secured the door, and called the front desk to report it. No hesitation, no inner debate visible on his face. Just a clean, clear decision made by someone whose integrity was not a performance, but a reflex. Victor leaned back in his chair. He picked up the bourbon and took a small sip. The burn traveled down his throat and settled in his chest. He had found what he was looking for. But he was not a man who acted on a single data point. He would need to verify. He would need to know more about this young man. He picked up his phone and called the hotel manager. "I need the employee file for the valet who parked my car this evening," he said. "The young man, Marcus, I believe his name was. I'd like to see his full personnel record." The hotel manager, a man named Gerald Forsyth, who had perfected the art of serving the ultra-wealthy without asking unnecessary questions, said of course and promised to have it delivered within the hour. He did not ask why. He did not wonder aloud whether this was appropriate or legal. He simply did what people in his position always did when $12 billion made a request. He complied. The file arrived at Victor's suite at 1:15 in the morning, delivered by a night manager who knocked softly, handed over a manila envelope, and disappeared like a shadow retreating from light. Victor opened it at the desk by the window. Outside, the city sparkled with the cold indifference of 10 million lives being lived in stacked apartments and crowded streets. He pulled out the file. It was thin. There was not much to Marcus Cole, at least not on paper. A single page of employment information. Emergency contact, none listed. Previous employment, warehouse, grocery store, car wash. Education, GED. Date of birth, March 14, 2003. Place of birth, Detroit, Michigan. Mother's name, listed as next of kin at some point in the system and carried forward through paperwork that nobody ever bothered to update. Denise Elaine Cole. Victor read the name. Then he read it again. He set the paper down on the desk and placed both hands flat on either side of it, fingers spread, as if he needed to anchor himself to something solid. His vision blurred, not from tears, not yet, but from a rush of blood to his head that made the room tilt slightly to the left. Denise Elaine Cole. He had not spoken that name aloud in 23 years, but he had thought it every single day. It was the name on the birth certificate he kept in a fireproof safe in his office at home. The birth certificate of a baby boy born on March 14, 2003, in Detroit, Michigan. A baby boy named Marcus James Cole. A baby boy who was supposed to have died in a house fire on September 8, 2003, at the age of 5 months and 25 days. Victor pushed back from the desk. His chair rolled silently on the thick carpet. He stood up, walked to the window, and pressed his forehead against the cold glass. 42 stories below, a taxi honked. A siren wailed in the distance, rising and falling like a mechanical cry. His reflection stared back at him from the glass, a man of 57 years with gray at his temples and lines carved into his face by decades of deals and losses, and the one loss that had never healed, the loss of a son he had held only once. The story of Marcus's supposed death was a story Victor had told himself so many times it had calcified into fact. He and Denise had been young. He was 24, ambitious, hungry, already making his first moves in the financial world. She was 22, beautiful, fierce, working 2 jobs while studying for her nursing degree. They were not married. They were not even really together, not in any way that looked like a future. It was intense and brief and complicated in the way that such things often are when 2 people are too young and too proud to ask for help. When Denise told him she was pregnant, Victor panicked. He was not ready. He was in the middle of raising capital for his first fund. He was sleeping 3 hours a night and eating meals out of vending machines. A baby was not part of the plan. He told Denise he needed time to think, and then he took that time and stretched it into weeks. And the weeks became months, and the months became a silence so long and so loud that it said everything without saying a word. He was not there when Marcus was born. He sent money. He sent it through an intermediary, a lawyer who handled things that Victor did not want to handle himself. He did not hold his son. He did not see his son. He built a wall of distance and ambition between himself and the life he had helped create. And he told himself that the money was enough, that the money was his contribution, that Denise was strong and would manage, because she always managed. Then came the fire. September 8, 2003, a Tuesday. Victor remembered the day of the week because he was in a board meeting when the call came, and board meetings were always on Tuesdays. His lawyer called. There had been a fire at the apartment building where Denise lived. A gas leak, they said. The building was old. The landlord was negligent. The wiring was bad. 3 people died. Among them, according to the report that Victor's lawyer obtained, were a young woman named Denise Cole and her infant son Marcus. The bodies were burned beyond recognition. Identification was made through dental records and personal effects. The fire marshal's report was filed. The death certificates were issued. The case was closed. Victor attended no funeral. He did not know if there was one. He paid for the burial through his lawyer, 2 plots in a cemetery in Detroit that he visited once, 5 years later, on a gray November morning when the guilt finally became too heavy to carry alone. He stood at the grave markers and tried to feel something. and what he felt was a hollowness so vast it frightened him. He left Detroit that afternoon and did not return. He buried his grief the same way he had buried everything else in his life that did not serve his ambition. He put it in a box, he locked the box, he built a company on top of the box, and he never opened it again. But now, standing at the window of a penthouse suite in Manhattan, staring at an employee file that contained 3 details that matched the birth certificate in his safe, Victor felt the lock on that box begin to crack. March 14, 2003. Detroit, Michigan. Denise Elaine Cole. These were not common combinations. This was not coincidence. This was either the most extraordinary accident of administrative record-keeping in history, or it was the truth. And the truth, if it was the truth, meant that everything Victor had believed for 23 years was a lie. It meant his son was alive. It meant Denise might be alive. It meant someone, somewhere, had constructed a fiction of death and let him live inside it for more than 2 decades. Victor sat down on the edge of the bed. The mattress was firm and expensive and utterly irrelevant. He placed the employee file on the nightstand and stared at it the way a man stares at a loaded weapon, with respect and fear and the understanding that what he did next could not be undone. He could call his investigators. He could have them run the full background within hours. DNA tests could be arranged. Records could be pulled. The machinery of wealth could grind through this mystery the way it ground through every obstacle Victor had ever faced. But for the first time in decades, Victor Whitfield did not want to use the machinery. He wanted to sit with this. He wanted to feel it. He wanted to let the possibility, however fragile, however terrifying, exist in the air between heartbeats. His phone buzzed on the desk, an email from his chief of staff about the Meridian acquisition, another from his personal attorney about a real estate closing. The world continued its relentless turning. Victor ignored all of it. He lay back on the bed, fully clothed, shoes still on, and stared at the ceiling. The chandelier above him threw patterns of light that shifted and swayed with some invisible draft. He thought about the young man in the parking structure, the valet who had caught the keys without complaint, who had parked the car with the care of a man who respected things that did not belong to him, who had found a briefcase full of secrets and had not even been tempted. The next morning came like it always did, too early and too bright. Marcus's alarm was his own internal clock, and it pulled him out of a shallow sleep at 4:45 on the dot. He lay in bed for exactly 60 seconds, which was the luxury he allowed himself each morning, then swung his legs over the side and planted his feet on the cold floor. The cold was a reliable companion. It told him the heater was still broken. The landlord had promised to fix it 2 weeks ago, and Marcus knew that promise had the same structural integrity as the building itself, which was to say, not much. He went through his morning routine with the efficiency of a man who had eliminated all unnecessary motion from his life. Shower in the shared bathroom, cold because the hot water did not kick in until after 6. Teeth brushed with a toothbrush that was 3 months past its recommended replacement date. Uniform on. Shoes polished the night before with a rag and a tin of shoe polish he kept on the windowsill. The cut on his cheek from the key was covered by a small adhesive bandage that he replaced with a fresh one from the dollar store pack he kept in his locker at work. The bus ride was 40 minutes of half sleep and window gazing. Marcus leaned his head against the glass and watched the city transition from the tired blocks of his neighborhood to the polished avenues of Midtown Manhattan. The transformation happened gradually, the way a river changes color when it meets the sea. The buildings got taller, the cars got shinier, the people on the sidewalks walked faster and looked straighter ahead, as if they had somewhere important to be and could not afford to be distracted by anything as ordinary as the world around them. Marcus arrived at the hotel at 5:55, 5 minutes before his shift. He liked being early. Early meant he could check the schedule without Pratt hovering. He could organize the keyboard. He could walk the parking structure and make sure everything was where it should be. These small rituals gave him a sense of control that the rest of his life did not offer. In a world where everything felt temporary and fragile, the valet stand was his territory. Small, yes. Unglamorous, certainly. but his. Deshaun arrived at 6:10, yawning and carrying 2 cups of coffee from the bodega on the corner. He handed one to Marcus without a word, and Marcus accepted it with a nod that said everything a thank you would have said. They had developed this shorthand over months of working together, a language of small gestures and silences that communicated more efficiently than words. Deshaun looked at the bandage on Marcus's cheek and raised an eyebrow. Marcus shrugged. The conversation was over. The morning shift was routine. Town cars and SUVs, executives heading to meetings, tourists heading to museums, a bride in a white limousine who was either getting married or coming from a very late party. Marcus parked each car with the same attention. He opened doors. He said good morning. He made himself useful and invisible in equal measure. It was not until just after noon that the routine cracked. Marcus was returning from parking a Mercedes in the lower level when he saw Mr. Pratt standing at the valet stand with a man Marcus did not recognize. The man was wearing a dark suit, no tie, and had the posture of someone who was used to being listened to. He was not a guest. He did not have the look. Guests looked relaxed or harried, depending on whether they were arriving or departing. This man looked purposeful. He was holding a leather portfolio and speaking to Pratt in a low voice. When Marcus approached, both men turned to look at him. "Marcus," Pratt said, and there was something different in his voice, something careful. "This is Mr. Okonkwo. He's with Whitfield Capital. He'd like to have a word with you." Pratt said this as if it were the most normal thing in the world, as if representatives of $12 billion companies showed up at the valet stand every day to chat with parking attendants. But his eyes told a different story. They were wide and slightly panicked, the eyes of a man who did not understand what was happening and did not like it. The man named Okonkwo extended his hand. His grip was firm and brief. "Marcus Cole," he said, as if confirming the name for his own records. "My name is David Okonkwo. I'm the executive assistant to Victor Whitfield. Mr. Whitfield would like to invite you to have lunch with him today in the hotel restaurant, 1 o'clock. He said this in a tone that was polite but left very little room for the possibility that Marcus might say no. Marcus blinked, once, twice. He looked at Pratt, whose expression suggested he was experiencing a minor cardiac event. He looked back at Okonkwo. "Lunch," Marcus repeated, as if the word were in a foreign language and he needed to translate it. "Mr. Whitfield wants to have lunch with me." It was not a question exactly, but it was not a statement of acceptance either. It was the sound of a man trying to make sense of something that made no sense at all. "That's correct," Okonkwo said. 1 o'clock, the private dining room on the mezzanine level. Mr. Whitfield asked that you come as you are. No need to change. He paused and looked at Marcus with an expression that was difficult to read, something between professional neutrality and genuine curiosity. He was very specific about wanting to speak with you personally. Then Okonkwo nodded once, turned, and walked back into the hotel, his shoes clicking on the marble floor with the crisp rhythm of someone who had places to be and a schedule that did not tolerate delays. Marcus stood at the valet stand and stared at the doors through which Okonkwo had disappeared. The lobby beyond the glass was a world of crystal and light, bellhops and concierges, and guests floating through the space like figures in a painting. Marcus felt like a man standing on the edge of something, though he did not know what. A cliff, a bridge, an open door to a room he had never been invited into. His hands were steady, but his mind was churning. Why would a billionaire who had thrown keys at his face 12 hours ago want to sit down and eat lunch with him? "What was that about?" Deshaun asked, appearing at his elbow with the supernatural timing he had for arriving at moments of maximum confusion. His eyes were wide. "Did that dude just say Victor Whitfield wants to have lunch with you? The Victor Whitfield? The guy who hit you in the face with his car keys? That Victor Whitfield?" "That's the one," Marcus said quietly. He tugged at the cuffs of his uniform jacket. It was a nervous habit he did not know he had, something his hands did when his brain was processing too many variables at once. 1 o'clock, private dining room. He paused. "He said to come as I am." He looked down at his uniform, the black pants with the ironed crease, the maroon jacket with the hotel crest on the breast pocket, the polished shoes, the bandage on his cheek. This was who he was, a valet, a parking attendant, a man who caught keys and said, "Yes, sir." He could not imagine what he and Victor Whitfield could possibly have to talk about over lunch. "You think it's about the briefcase?" Deshaun asked, lowering his voice. Marcus had told him about finding it, about calling the front desk. Deshaun had said what he always said in such situations, which was that Marcus was too honest for his own good. Maybe the dude is grateful you didn't steal his stuff. Rich people do weird things when they're grateful. My cousin's friend works for some tech billionaire in San Francisco, and the guy bought her a car because she found his dog. A whole car, brand new, off the lot. Marcus shook his head slowly. "He didn't look like the grateful type when he threw those keys at me," he said. He checked his watch. It was 12:15, 45 minutes until a lunch that felt like walking into a room where the floor might be missing. "I'm going to go," he said, more to himself than to Deshaun. "I'm going to go because if I don't go, I'll wonder about it forever, and I've already got enough things to wonder about." At 12:55, Marcus took the elevator to the mezzanine level. He had never been above the lobby in his months of working at the hotel. The upper floors were for guests and management, not for valets. The elevator doors opened onto a hallway that smelled like fresh lilies and polished wood. The carpet was so thick his shoes made no sound. Paintings lined the walls, large canvases of abstract art that probably cost more than the building Marcus lived in. At the end of the hallway was a door marked Private Dining, and standing beside it was David Okonkwo, who opened the door without a word and gestured Marcus inside. The room was smaller than Marcus expected. A single round table set for two. White tablecloth, crystal glasses, silverware arranged with geometric precision. A window that looked out over the city, buildings and sky, and the tiny movements of life far below. Victor Whitfield was already seated. He had removed his jacket and rolled his sleeves to the elbow. And Marcus noticed for the first time that the man had thick, muscular forearms, the kind that suggested he had not always been behind a desk. His watch was on the table beside his plate, as if he had removed it to be more comfortable, or as if he wanted to make a point about time being set aside. Victor looked up when Marcus entered. He did not stand. He did not smile. But something shifted in his expression, something subtle, like a window being opened in a room that had been closed for too long. He gestured to the empty chair. "Sit down," he said. "Not please sit down. Not would you like to sit. Just sit down." It was the voice of a man who gave directions, not invitations. Marcus sat. He placed his hands on the table, then moved them to his lap, then placed them on the table again. He did not know what to do with his hands. This was a situation for which no foster home, no warehouse job, no late-night bus ride had prepared him. He was sitting across from one of the richest men in the world, a man who had thrown keys at his face, and they were about to eat lunch. The absurdity of it was so complete that Marcus felt something that might have been the beginning of a laugh caught in his throat, but he swallowed it and waited. Victor studied him. The gaze was not casual. It was the gaze of a man who was used to evaluating things, properties, companies, people, and assigning them a value. Marcus could feel it moving across his face, his posture, his hands, the bandage on his cheek. He felt like an item on a balance sheet being assessed for potential. He did not look away. Whatever this was, whatever Victor Whitfield wanted, Marcus was not going to be the first to blink. "You found my briefcase last night," Victor said. It was not a question. "In the back of the car, you saw it. You did not open it. You closed the door and called the front desk. Is that correct?" His voice was calm, measured, each word placed with the precision of a chess move. He was not making conversation, he was establishing facts. "That's correct," Marcus said. His voice came out steadier than he felt. He was aware of the distance between himself and the door, not because he wanted to leave, but because awareness of exits was another survival skill that foster care had drilled into him. Always know your way out. Always know the fastest path to safety. "Why?" Victor asked. He leaned forward slightly. His eyes were dark brown, almost black, and they held Marcus's with an intensity that made the air between them feel thinner. "You're 23 years old. You work as a valet. You live, if my information is correct, in a one-room apartment in Brooklyn. You earn barely enough to cover rent and food. You found a briefcase full of documents that could be worth millions to the right buyer. Corporate secrets, acquisition plans, financial data. You could have photographed them, sent them to a competitor, and been sitting on a beach somewhere next week with more money than you would make in 10 lifetimes. But you didn't. You didn't even open the clasp. I want to know why. Marcus was quiet for a moment. The question hung between them like smoke. He thought about it, really thought about it. Not because the answer was complicated, but because he wanted to say it right. He wanted to say it in a way that this man, this billionaire who measured the world in leverage and advantage, could understand. Because it wasn't mine, Marcus said simply. He did not elaborate. He did not dress it up. He did not offer a philosophy or a moral framework. He stated a fact as plain and solid as the table between them. The briefcase was not his. The documents were not his. The car was not his. And Marcus Cole did not take things that did not belong to him. Not because he was afraid of getting caught, not because he was trying to impress anyone, but because the only thing he had ever truly owned in his life was his integrity, and he was not going to sell it for any amount of money. Victor stared at him. The stare went on for a long time, long enough for a waiter to enter, set down 2 glasses of water, and leave without being acknowledged by either man. Long enough for the ice in the glasses to settle and crack. Long enough for the shadows on the wall to shift by a degree as the afternoon sun moved across the sky. When Victor finally spoke, his voice had changed. The authority was still there, but underneath it was something else, something raw and unsteady, like a foundation that had shifted. "Tell me about your mother," Victor said. The question landed like a stone thrown into still water. Marcus felt the ripples move through his body. His chest tightened, his jaw clenched. The muscle in his left cheek, the one beneath the bandage, twitched once. He had not talked about his mother to anyone in years. Not because the subject was forbidden, but because there was so little to say. A name on a form, a ghost in a file, a woman he had never known. "I don't have a mother," Marcus said, and the flatness in his voice was not anger or sadness. It was the practiced neutrality of a man who had said these words before, in social workers' offices and foster parents' kitchens and school counselors' rooms. "She died in a fire when I was a baby. That's what they told me. I was 5 months old. I don't remember her. I don't have pictures. I don't have anything of hers. I went into foster care, and that's where I stayed until I aged out." He paused. His thumb rubbed against his index finger under the table, a self-soothing gesture so old he did not remember when it started. "Her name was Denise Cole. That's all I know." Victor Whitfield's face did something Marcus had never seen a face do. It did not crumble. Because men like Victor Whitfield did not crumble, but it fractured. Hairline cracks appeared in the mask of control he wore like armor. His left eye twitched. His nostrils flared with a sharp intake of breath. His hand, the one resting on the table next to his watch, curled into a fist so tight that the tendons stood out on the back of it like bridge cables under tension. He pressed his fist against the tablecloth and breathed through whatever was happening inside him. The exhale was slow and controlled, the kind of breath a man takes when he is trying to keep the world from spinning off its axis. "Denise Elaine Cole," Victor said, and it was not a question. It was a recitation, a prayer, a name pulled from a locked room inside his chest and spoken aloud for the first time in decades. "She worked at Beaumont Hospital. She was studying for her nursing degree. She had a scar on her right hand from a cooking burn she got when she was 16. She laughed with her whole body. She could not cook anything except scrambled eggs and toast, but she made the best scrambled eggs you ever tasted." His voice cracked on the last word, not dramatically, just a small fissure, like a crack in a glass that had been held too tightly. Marcus stared at him. The world around them, the crystal glasses, the white tablecloth, the city gleaming through the window, all of it receded, pulled back like a tide leaving the shore, until there was nothing left but 2 men sitting across from each other and a silence that was louder than any words either of them had ever spoken. Marcus's brain was moving fast, faster than it had moved in years, processing data the way a computer processes code, running comparisons, looking for explanations that made sense. This man knew his mother's name, her full name, her workplace, a scar on her hand, the way she laughed. "How do you know my mother?" Marcus asked, and his voice had dropped to something barely above a whisper, not because he was afraid, but because the question felt so large that speaking it at full volume seemed dangerous, like shouting in a room full of glass. "How do you know those things about her?" Victor did not answer immediately. He reached for his glass of water and drank half of it in 3 long swallows. Then he set the glass down and looked at Marcus with an expression that was no longer the gaze of a billionaire evaluating a valet. It was the look of a man standing at the edge of a confession that had been building for 23 years. "Because I knew her," Victor said. "I knew her before you were born. I knew her when she was 22 years old and working double shifts and carrying a baby she refused to give up, even when everyone told her it was too much. I knew her because I was the one who should have been there and wasn't." He paused. The pause was so heavy, Marcus could feel it pressing against his sternum. "Marcus, I'm going to tell you something, and I need you to hear me. I am not asking you to believe it right now. I am only asking you to hear it." "Say it," Marcus said, and his voice was like iron, flat and hard and utterly still. "I am your father," Victor said. "Your biological father. I was 24 years old when you were born. I was not ready. I was not brave. I sent money through a lawyer because I was too much of a coward to show up in person. And then, 6 months later, I was told that you and your mother died in a fire. I was told your bodies were identified. I paid for the burial. I visited the graves. I have believed for 23 years that you were dead. And last night, I read your employee file, and I saw your birthday, your birthplace, and your mother's name. And I have not slept since." The silence that followed was the kind of silence that exists between the lightning and the thunder. The kind of silence that fills a space after something has been broken and before anyone has decided whether to pick up the pieces or walk away. Marcus sat perfectly still. His face showed nothing. His body showed nothing. 23 years of foster care had taught him how to absorb a blow without flinching, how to take information that could shatter a person and hold it at arm's length, turning it over, examining it for traps and angles before letting it anywhere near his heart. Inside, though, inside was different. Inside, Marcus felt something cracking, not breaking, cracking. The way ice cracks on a lake in early spring, when the warm water underneath starts pushing upward and the surface begins to give. He had spent his entire life without parents, without a father, without even a story about his father. The foster care files said unknown for paternal information. Unknown. As if his father were a variable in an equation that had never been solved. And now, sitting across from him in a private dining room in a luxury hotel in Manhattan, drinking water from a crystal glass, was a man who claimed to be the answer. "I need you to understand something," Marcus said, and his voice was quiet, but it carried a weight that made Victor go still. "I spent 23 years in the system, 12 foster homes. Some of them were fine, some of them were hell. I ate crackers for dinner. I slept in rooms with kids who screamed at night because of things that happened to them that nobody wants to talk about. I wore shoes with holes in them. I got beat. I got ignored. I got moved around like furniture that nobody wanted but nobody could throw away. And you're telling me that my father, the man who should have been there, was alive this whole time, was rich this whole time, was one of the richest men in the world this whole time." Each sentence landed like a hammer blow, and Victor absorbed them all without looking away. His face was gray now, the color of a man who is being forced to look at the full cost of his choices laid out in front of him like a balance sheet written in blood. His hand, still curled in a fist on the table, had not relaxed. The knuckles were white. "And last night," Marcus continued, his voice dropping even lower, "you threw your car keys at my face. You called me boy. You cut my cheek." He reached up and peeled the bandage off slowly, revealing the thin red line beneath it. "Your keys did that. Your keys, from your car, thrown by your hand, at your son's face. And you didn't know. And that is supposed to make it better. It doesn't. Victor said immediately, and his voice broke fully this time. Not a hairline crack, but a visible fracture, the kind that changes the structural integrity of everything around it. Nothing makes it better. Nothing I say right now can undo what was done or what I failed to do. I know that. I know that as clearly as I have ever known anything in my life. He unfolded his fist and pressed his open palm flat on the table. His fingers were trembling. Victor Whitfield, a man who had stared down hostile boards and regulatory agencies and market crashes without blinking, was trembling. "I was told you were dead," he said again, and this time the words came with the rawness of someone who needs to be believed. "I was given death certificates. I visited graves. I mourned you. Badly, insufficiently, selfishly, but I mourned you. And I mourned your mother. And I built everything I have on top of that grief, because I didn't know what else to do with it. I buried it so deep I thought it was gone, but it was never gone. It was just waiting." He paused and swallowed hard, his Adam's apple moving visibly. "Someone lied to me, Marcus. Someone created those documents. Someone staged that fire, or falsified the reports, or I don't know what they did. But someone made me believe my son was dead when he wasn't, and I intend to find out who and why." Marcus sat with this. He did not react immediately because he had learned a long time ago that immediate reactions were a luxury for people whose lives had not taught them to be careful. He turned the information over in his mind the way a jeweler turns a stone, looking at every facet, checking for flaws. The story could be true. It could also be a lie. Rich men lied all the time. They lied to get what they wanted, and what they wanted was usually more of what they already had, which was everything. But the trembling hands, the cracked voice, the specific details about his mother, her scar, her laugh, her scrambled eggs, those were not the details of a lie. Those were the details of a memory. "If what you're saying is true," Marcus said slowly, each word chosen with surgical precision, "then there are things that need to happen. DNA tests, real ones, from a real lab, not something you control. Independent verification, records pulled from Detroit, from the fire department, from Child Protective Services, from the foster care system. I want to see everything, every document, every report, every piece of paper that has my name on it. And I want a lawyer, my own lawyer, not yours, mine." Victor nodded, once, firm. "Whatever you need," he said. "Whatever you want, I will pay for it. And before you tell me you don't want my money, understand that this is not charity. This is obligation. This is 23 years of child support that I should have been paying if anyone had told me the truth. This is the minimum. It is not enough, and it will never be enough, but it is what I can do right now, today, in this room." Marcus looked at him, really looked at him, not at the suit, or the watch, or the carefully maintained facade of a man who is used to controlling every room he entered. He looked at the eyes. They were dark brown, almost black. Marcus had seen those eyes before. In the mirror, every morning, every time he brushed his teeth, or checked the bandage on his cheek, or straightened his collar before a shift. Those eyes were his eyes, not similar, his. The exact same shape, the exact same depth, the exact same way they held light and shadow in equal measure. A waiter entered and began to set down plates, grilled fish, roasted vegetables, bread that smelled like it had been pulled from the oven minutes ago. Neither man looked at the food. Neither man moved toward it. The waiter sensed something in the air, some charge or pressure that made the room feel like the inside of a thundercloud, and he placed the last plate with delicate speed and left without a word. "There's something else I need to tell you," Victor said after the door closed. He pressed his fingertips together in front of his chest, forming a steeple that he stared at as if it held answers. "Your mother, Denise. I was told she died in that fire, but if you survived, then there is a possibility, maybe a small one, maybe not, that she survived too. I have already contacted my investigative team. They are pulling records as we speak. Fire department archives, hospital records, social security activity, credit histories, everything." The words hit Marcus in the center of his chest with the force of a physical impact. He had grieved his mother his entire life, or rather, he had lived in the absence of her, which was a different kind of grief, the kind that does not spike and fade, but sits in your bones, like a low-grade fever that never fully breaks. The possibility that she was alive, that she was somewhere out there, breathing, aging, living, that she might have her own reasons for disappearing, or her own tragedy that kept her away. The possibility opened a door in Marcus's chest that he had bricked over so long ago he had forgotten the door was there. "I need to go," Marcus said suddenly. He pushed back from the table and stood. The chair scraped against the floor with a sound that cut through the silence like a blade. "I need to go back to work. I need to park cars. I need to do something with my hands, because if I sit here any longer, I'm going to say or feel something I'm not ready for." His voice was tight, controlled, but there was a vibration underneath it, the hum of a wire pulled to its limit. Victor stood too. He was taller than Marcus by 2 or 3 inches, and broader, and the similarity in their builds was impossible to ignore. Two men built from the same blueprint, shaped by radically different circumstances. "Marcus," he said, and the name came out of his mouth like it cost him something to say it. "I am not going to walk away from this. I am not going to disappear. I know you have no reason to trust me. I know I have done nothing to earn it. But I am asking you, as a man who has just discovered that the son he mourned for 23 years is alive and standing in front of him, please, give me the chance to prove that I can be more than the man who threw his keys at your face." Marcus looked at him for a long time. Then he reached down, picked up a piece of bread from the table, and put it in his pocket. It was a reflexive gesture, something left over from the years when food was never certain, and every meal you did not eat now might be the meal you needed later. He saw Victor's eyes follow the gesture, saw the understanding that crossed the older man's face, saw the way it deepened the cracks in his composure. "I'll take the DNA test," Marcus said from the doorway, "but I'm not calling you anything until the results come back. And even then, a piece of paper doesn't make you a father. 23 years of absence doesn't get erased by a blood test and a lunch." He paused. "Thank you for the bread." And then he walked out, down the hallway with the thick carpet and the expensive paintings, into the elevator that smelled like perfume and possibility, and back down to the lobby where the marble floors reflected his uniform and the life he had been living before a billionaire's employee file cracked the world open. Deshawn was waiting at the valet stand with an expression that suggested he had been vibrating with curiosity for the entire hour Marcus was gone. "Well," he said before Marcus had fully stepped outside. "What happened? What did he want? Are you fired? Are you getting sued? Did he apologize for the keys? Did he give you money? Talk to me, man. I've been dying out here." Marcus put his hands in his pockets and felt the bread against his fingers. It was still warm. "He says he's my father," Marcus said, and the word sounded so impossible that he almost laughed. Almost. The corner of his mouth did that twitch again, the half-smile that never fully committed. "The billionaire who threw keys at my face says he's my biological father. He says my mother and I were supposed to have died in a fire 23 years ago. He says somebody lied. He says he wants a DNA test." Deshawn's mouth opened. Then it closed. Then it opened again. He looked like a man who had been told that the Earth was actually a cube and was trying to rearrange his entire understanding of geometry to accommodate this new information. "You're joking," he said. "Tell me you're joking. Tell me this is some kind of rich people prank where they mess with the help and then film it for the internet." "I'm not joking," Marcus said. "I wish I were." He looked out at the street. A taxi stopped at the curb and a woman in a red coat stepped out, her heels clicking on the pavement. A doorman rushed forward. The world continued its performance, indifferent to the fact that one of its minor players had just been told his entire backstory was a fiction. "I need to think," Marcus said. "I need to think, and I need to park some cars, and I need to not feel anything for a while. Can you cover the front for a few minutes? I need to sit down." Deshawn nodded immediately, all jokes gone from his face, replaced by the quiet steadiness of a friend who understood that some moments required presence, not commentary. "Go," he said. "I got you. Take all the time you need. And Marcus, He waited until Marcus looked at him. Whatever happens, whatever this turns out to be, you're still you. You're still the guy who wouldn't open a stranger's briefcase. That doesn't change because some rich dude says he's your daddy. Marcus went to the bench behind the parking structure. His bench. The one where he and Deshawn ate lunch. He sat down and leaned his head back against the concrete wall. The sky above was a narrow strip of blue between buildings, and he stared at it until his eyes watered from the brightness. His mind was a room full of spinning objects, and he could not grab any of them long enough to examine them. Father, fire, death certificates, graves, a mother who might be alive, a billionaire with trembling hands and his own eyes staring back at him across a table set for two. He thought about Mrs. Abernathy, the third foster home, the cornbread, the hymns. He thought about the day the social worker came to take him away, and how Mrs. Abernathy had hugged him at the door and whispered, "You're going to be somebody special, Marcus. Don't you ever forget that." He had held on to those words like a stone in his pocket, smooth from years of rubbing, a talisman against the darkness that had followed. He pulled the bread from his pocket and tore off a piece. It was soft and rich and buttered and unlike any bread he had ever tasted. He ate it slowly, chewing each bite, letting it fill his mouth with warmth. The afternoon passed in a blur of engines and keys and the mechanical choreography of parking and retrieving and parking again. Marcus moved through it on autopilot, his body performing the routines while his mind circled the same questions over and over, like a plane that could not find a runway. Was it true? Could it be true? Did it matter? If Victor Whitfield was his father, what did that change? It did not erase 12 foster homes. It did not give him back the childhood he never had. It did not fill the silence in his apartment where a mother's voice should have been. At the end of his shift, Marcus found an envelope in his locker, plain white, no name on it. Inside was a business card. David Okonkwo, Executive Assistant, Whitfield Capital. On the back, handwritten in precise block letters, was a phone number and a single line. Call when you are ready. The DNA test is already arranged. Your choice of lab. Marcus held the card for a long time. Then he put it in his wallet, behind his bus pass and his employee ID, and went home to his apartment on Myrtle Avenue, where the heater was still broken and the walls were still thin, and Mr. Deacon was still coughing and Mrs. Patterson's television was still playing, and the world was exactly the same as it had been that morning, except that it was not the same at all. Nothing was the same. Nothing would ever be the same. He did not sleep that night. He lay on his bed in the dark and listened to the building breathe, the creaks and groans of old wood and old pipes and old lives stacked on top of each other like books on a shelf that was never quite straight. He thought about his mother, Denise Elaine Cole. He said the name aloud, softly, into the darkness of his room. It was the first time he had spoken her name in years. The sound of it felt strange and sacred, like a word in a language he had once known but had forgotten. At 3 in the morning, he got up and turned on the light. He went to the small closet where he kept his few possessions and pulled out a shoebox from the top shelf. Inside the shoebox were the only things he had from his childhood. A social worker's business card, faded and soft from handling. A photograph of a building, an apartment complex in Detroit, taken from a newspaper clipping about the fire. The building was charred and gutted, a skeleton of walls and windows with the sky showing through. On the back of the clipping, someone had written in pencil, Myrtle Street Fire, September 8, 2003. 3 dead. 3 dead. That was the story. That was all the story there had ever been. A fire, 3 dead. A baby who survived because a neighbor heard crying and broke through a window. A baby pulled from smoke and ash and handed to a firefighter, and then handed to a hospital, and then handed to a system that would hold him loosely for the next 18 years. Marcus had read the clipping so many times the edges were soft and the ink was fading. He had memorized every word. He had built his understanding of his own origin on this single piece of paper, this small rectangle of newsprint that told him where he came from and what he had lost. But what if it was wrong? What if the 3 dead were not 3 dead? What if one of them, his mother, had survived? And the records were falsified, and the death certificates were manufactured. And somewhere in the 23 years between that fire and this moment, the truth had been buried under layers of paperwork and assumption, and the convenient fiction that dead people stay dead. Marcus pressed the clipping against his chest and breathed. The paper smelled like nothing. It was too old to smell like anything. But he held it against his heart anyway, because it was the closest thing he had to his mother, and he was not ready to let go of it, even if it might be a lie. The next morning, Marcus called the number on the business card. David Okonkwo answered on the second ring, his voice as composed and professional at 7 in the morning as it had been at the hotel. Marcus said 3 words, "I'm ready now." Okonkwo gave him an address, a medical facility on the Upper East Side that specialized in genetic testing, and a time, 10 o'clock that morning. Marcus said thank you and hung up and ironed his one good shirt, a blue Oxford he had bought at a thrift store 2 years ago. He did not own a suit. He did not own a tie. But the shirt was clean and pressed and the collar was straight, and that would have to be enough. The medical facility was on a quiet street lined with brownstones and trees that were just beginning to turn gold at the edges. Marcus arrived 15 minutes early and sat in a waiting room that looked more like a living room. Leather couches, fresh flowers, magazines arranged in perfect fans on a glass table. A receptionist offered him coffee, and he accepted because it was free and because his hands needed something to hold. The coffee was better than anything he had ever tasted, smooth and rich with no bitterness at all. And he thought about how even coffee was different when you had money, how wealth changed the taste of everything. Victor arrived at 9:58. He was wearing a different suit, navy this time, but the same posture, the same controlled stride, the same face that looked like it had been carved from something harder than stone. He saw Marcus and stopped. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then Victor crossed the room and sat down in the chair beside him, not across from him, beside him, close enough that Marcus could smell his cologne, which was the same woody scent that had been in the Rolls-Royce. They sat in silence for 30 seconds. Then Victor spoke. "Thank you for coming," he said, and the words were simple, but the way he said them was not. There was a weight behind them, a gravity that pulled at the syllables and made them sink into the air between the two men like stones dropped into deep water. "I know this is not easy. I know you don't trust me. I know I haven't earned anything from you. But you're here, and that means something to me." "It means I want answers," Marcus said. He did not look at Victor. He looked at the coffee in his hands. The surface trembled slightly with the micro movements of his fingers. "That's all it means right now. I want to know the truth. I've lived my whole life on a story that might be a lie, and I'm tired of maybe. I want to know." A technician came out and led them to separate rooms for the cheek swabs. The process took less than 5 minutes. A cotton swab rubbed against the inside of the cheek, sealed in a tube, labeled and logged. Marcus watched the technician work with the focused attention of a man who understood that this small plastic tube contained the answer to the question his entire life had been built around. Who am I? Where did I come from? And now, the question that had been added to the list only yesterday. Who was supposed to be there? Results would take 48 hours. The technician said this with the clinical cheerfulness of someone who delivered life-changing information on a regular basis and had learned to do so with a smile. 48 hours. 2 days. Marcus nodded, thanked the technician, and walked out of the building into the October sunlight. The air was crisp and carried the smell of fallen leaves and exhaust and the distant suggestion of rain. Victor followed him out and stood on the sidewalk beside him. "What happens now?" Marcus asked. He was looking at the trees. The gold was deeper than he had noticed on the way in, as if the world had continued changing while he was inside, which of course it had, because the world never stopped changing. Not for DNA tests, not for billionaires, not for valets, not for anyone. "Now we wait," Victor said. "And while we wait, I want to tell you everything. About your mother, about what happened, about the fire, about the 23 years. I will tell you every part of it, and I will not hide anything or shape it to make myself look better than I was. Because the truth is, Marcus, I was not a good man when you were born. I was ambitious and selfish and afraid, and those are explanations, not excuses. There is no excuse for what I did. For walking away from your mother when she was carrying you. For sending money through a lawyer instead of showing up in person. For being too much of a coward to hold my own son." Marcus turned to look at him. The sun was behind Victor, and it cast his face in shadow, and in that shadow, the resemblance between them was striking. The same jawline, the same brow, the same way the mouth set itself in a line that was neither smile nor frown, but something in between. Something that said, "This face has seen things and decided to keep going." "You can tell me," Marcus said, "but not today. Today I need to go to work. I need to park cars. I have a shift in 90 minutes, and if I'm late, Pratt will write me up, and I can't afford to lose this job. Not yet. Not until I know what's real." Victor flinched at that. The idea that his son, if Marcus was his son, was worried about being written up by a valet manager at a hotel where Victor was paying $4,000 a night for a penthouse suite. That contrast hit him in a place he could not defend. "You won't lose your job," he said quietly. "I'll make sure of that." "No," Marcus said, and the word came out sharper than he intended. He softened it, but only slightly. "You will not do that. You will not call the hotel. You will not talk to Pratt. You will not pull strings or make calls or use your name to change anything about my job. If you are my father, then the first thing you need to understand about me is that I do not take shortcuts. I do not accept favors I haven't earned, and I do not let other people fight my battles. That's how I survived 12 foster homes. That's how I survived last night when you threw your keys at my face. That's how I'll survive whatever comes next." Victor opened his mouth to respond, then closed it. He nodded slowly, and something that might have been respect moved across his features, mixed with something that might have been recognition. He was looking at a young man who had his stubbornness, his pride, his refusal to bend. He was looking at a mirror that showed him not who he was now, but who he might have been if the money and the power and the empire had been stripped away, and all that was left was the raw material underneath. "I understand," Victor said. He reached into his jacket and produced a second business card, this one his own. Victor Whitfield, Chairman, Whitfield Capital. On the back, in his own handwriting, a phone number. "This is my personal cell, not my office, not my assistant. Mine. When you're ready to talk, call me, day or night. I will answer." Marcus took the card. He looked at it, then he put it in his wallet next to a Conquos card, behind his bus pass and his employee ID. 2 business cards from 2 men in a world he did not belong to, tucked behind the artifacts of the world he did. He turned and walked toward the subway entrance. He did not look back. He did not wave. He walked the way he always walked, straight ahead, shoulders square, taking up exactly the amount of space he needed and no more. The next 48 hours were the longest of Marcus's life. He worked his shifts, he parked cars, he ate lunch with Deshawn on the bench behind the parking structure. He did not tell Deshawn about the DNA test, because saying it out loud would make it real, and Marcus was not ready for it to be real yet. He wanted to hold it at a distance, this possibility, this grenade that might turn out to be a gift, and examine it from every angle before letting it any closer. On the second evening, Marcus was sitting in his apartment eating a bowl of rice and beans when his phone rang. The number was unfamiliar. He answered with the caution of a man who had learned that unexpected phone calls were rarely good news. It was the medical facility. The results were in. Could he come tomorrow morning at 9? He said yes and hung up and set his phone on the table and looked at it for a long time, as if it were an object that had just changed shape in his hand. He did not sleep that night either. He sat by the window and watched the street below. A man walked a dog. A couple argued on the corner, their voices rising and falling like weather. A delivery truck backed into a loading dock with a beeping sound that punctuated the silence at regular intervals. Marcus thought about what he wanted the results to say. He did not know. Part of him wanted them to confirm that Victor Whitfield was his father. because that would mean the story of his life had a chapter he did not know about. And maybe that chapter contained answers to questions he had been asking since before he could form the questions into words. But another part of him, the part that had been building walls and reinforcing foundations for 23 years, wanted the results to say no match. Because no match meant the world was exactly as he had understood it, and understanding the world, even a cruel and lonely version of it, was safer than having the floor pulled out from under you. The medical facility was quiet at 9 in the morning. The same receptionist, the same flowers, the same coffee. Marcus did not take the coffee this time. His stomach was a knot pulled so tight he could feel it pressing against his spine. Victor was already there, seated in the same chair as before, wearing the same expression of controlled tension. They did not speak. They sat side by side and waited. The doctor was a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and a calm voice. The kind of voice that had delivered this type of news hundreds of times and had learned to do it with neither excitement nor dread. She sat across from them in a small office with diplomas on the wall and a potted plant in the corner that looked like it had survived many difficult conversations. She opened a folder. "The results of the paternity test are conclusive," she said. "Mr. Whitfield, Marcus is your biological son. The probability of paternity is 99.997%. This is as close to certainty as genetic science can provide." She said this clearly, without rushing, giving each word its full weight. Then she paused and looked at both men with the practiced patience of someone who understood that the moment after such a statement required silence. Marcus heard the words. He processed them. He did not react. His body remained perfectly still in the chair, his hands folded in his lap, his breathing even. But inside, something shifted. The way tectonic plates shift deep underground, a movement so large and so fundamental that the surface does not register it until much later. When the cracks appear in buildings and the roads buckle, and the landscape rearranges itself into something unrecognizable. Victor made a sound. It was small and private, the kind of sound a man makes when he has been holding his breath for 2 days and finally lets it go. He pressed his hand over his eyes and held it there, and Marcus watched the muscles in his jaw work as he fought to maintain control. The billionaire, the empire builder, the man who threw keys at faces without flinching. He was sitting in a doctor's office with his hand over his eyes, trying not to cry, and failing. A single tear escaped beneath his palm and ran down his wrist, disappearing into the cuff of his shirt. "Marcus," Victor said from behind his hand. His voice was wrecked, not broken, wrecked. The voice of a man who had been taken apart and had not yet figured out how to put himself back together. "My son, my son." He said it twice, as if once was not enough to make it true, as if the word needed to be repeated like a spell or a prayer before it could take hold in the real world. Marcus did not reach for him. He did not move toward comfort or connection. He sat in his chair and let the news settle over him like snow, cold and quiet and impossible to stop. He thought about the clipping in his shoebox, the Myrtle Street fire, 3 dead. Except 3 were not dead. One of them was sitting in a doctor's office in Manhattan with folded hands and a face that showed nothing, because showing nothing was the only armor he had ever owned. "What about my mother?" Marcus asked. His voice cut through the room like a blade through silk. "You said you were looking for her. Your investigators. What did they find?" Victor lowered his hand. His eyes were red, but his gaze was steady, and Marcus could see the machinery of his mind reassembling itself behind those eyes, clicking back into place like components in an engine that had briefly stalled and was now restarting. "They found something," he said carefully, "but I wanted to tell you after the test results. I wanted to be sure first." "Tell me now," Marcus said, and the 3 words carried the weight of 23 years of not knowing. Victor reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and produced a phone. He tapped the screen several times and then turned it toward Marcus. On the screen was a photograph, a driver's license, the state of Georgia. The name on the license was Denise E. Matthews. The face on the license was a woman in her mid-40s with brown skin and dark eyes, and a small scar on the right side of her jaw, close to where the chin meets the neck. Marcus stared at the face. He had no memory of his mother, no image to compare against. But something in the shape of the eyes, something in the curve of the mouth, something deeper than memory, something coded into the cells of his body, recognized her. Matthews is her married name, Victor said. She remarried in 2009. A man named George Matthews, a bus driver in Savannah, Georgia. They live in a small house on the east side of the city. She works as a nurse at a community health clinic. She has been alive this entire time, Marcus, living under a different name. Less than a day's drive from where you grew up in the system. Marcus's hands began to shake. Not dramatically, not visibly, unless you were looking closely. A fine tremor that started in his fingertips and moved up through his wrists and into his forearms. He pressed his palms flat against his thighs to stop it, but it would not stop. His body was reacting to information that his mind had not yet fully processed. The way a building sways in an earthquake before the occupants even feel the ground move. "She's alive," Marcus said. The words came out flat, almost monotone, stripped of all emotion, because if he let even a sliver of emotion into his voice, the rest of it would follow like water through a crack in a dam, and he was not ready for that flood. Not here. Not in this office, with its diplomas and its potted plant, and a billionaire father he had known for 3 days. "She's alive," Victor confirmed. "And Marcus, there's more. My investigators spoke to a retired detective in Detroit who worked the Myrtle Street fire. He told them something that changes everything. The fire was not an accident. It was arson. Someone set that fire deliberately, and the person who set it was a man named Raymond Lowell, who was Denise's landlord and who had been threatening her for months over unpaid rent. Lowell set the fire to destroy evidence of his own building code violations and insurance fraud. He didn't care who was inside." Marcus closed his eyes. Behind his lids, the darkness was not dark. It was red and orange and hot, the colors of a fire he did not remember, but that had shaped every moment of his life since. A fire set by a landlord, a man who burned a building with people inside to cover his own crimes. A man who turned a 5-month-old baby into an orphan and a young mother into a ghost. "After the fire," Victor continued, his voice low and steady, each word placed with the deliberation of a man building a bridge across a chasm. Denise was severely burned. She spent 4 months in the hospital. 3rd-degree burns on her arms and back. During that time, the hospital records were confused. Another woman who died in the fire was misidentified as Denise. The death certificate was issued in her name. When Denise recovered, she discovered that she was legally dead and that her baby had been placed in foster care. She tried to get you back, Marcus. She filed petitions. She went to court. But she had no identification, no money, no legal proof of who she was, and the system that was supposed to protect families, treated her like a fraud. Victor paused. He seemed to understand the weight of what he was delivering and the need to give Marcus space between each blow. The doctor had quietly left the room at some point, sensing that this conversation had grown far beyond the boundaries of a paternity test. It was just the two of them now, father and son, separated by a glass table in 23 years and more pain than either of them knew how to hold. "She fought for 2 years, Victor said. 2 years of courtrooms and social workers and bureaucrats who told her that the paperwork said she was dead and that dead women do not have custody rights. She was homeless during part of this time. She slept in shelters. She worked odd jobs to pay for a lawyer who ultimately could not help her. And then, in 2006, she was told that you had been adopted, that your file was sealed, that she could no longer access any information about your placement or your whereabouts." "I was never adopted," Marcus said, and his voice was ice. Pure, clear, cold ice. "Nobody adopted me. I was in the system for 18 years, 12 homes. Nobody wanted me permanently. Nobody even tried. Whatever they told her was a lie. Another lie on top of all the other lies." Victor nodded, and the nod was heavy with the understanding that the system, the vast and indifferent machinery of government that was supposed to catch the people who fell, had not only failed to catch Marcus, but had actively prevented his mother from reaching him. It was not malice, perhaps. It was something worse. It was bureaucracy. Forms filled out incorrectly, files mislabeled, identities confused, boxes checked by overworked clerks who were processing 50 cases a day and could not see the individual tragedies embedded in the paperwork. "Lol," Marcus said. The name came out of his mouth like something that tasted bad. "The landlord, what happened to him?" "He collected the insurance money," Victor said. "He was investigated but never charged. Insufficient evidence." He went on to purchase 3 more properties in the Detroit area. He is currently living in a suburb outside the city. He is 71 years old. He has never been held accountable for what he did. Marcus stood up. The chair tipped backward and would have fallen if the wall had not caught it. He walked to the window and pressed both palms against the glass. The city below was bright and busy, taxis and pedestrians, and the endless mechanical pulse of millions of lives being lived in proximity to each other without any awareness of the quiet explosions happening in rooms like this, in offices and hospitals and courtrooms, where people's lives were rearranged by information that arrived too late. "I want to see her," Marcus said. His voice was no longer ice. It was something else, something he did not have a name for. A quality between determination and desperation, between the man he had built himself into and the child who had never stopped looking for the door his mother might walk through. "I want to go to Savannah. I want to see my mother. I'll have the plane ready in 2 hours," Victor said, and Marcus turned to look at him with an expression that was almost amused. "No," Marcus said. "No planes, no limousines, no entourage. I'll take the bus, the Greyhound, the way normal people travel, the way she would have traveled. If you want to come, you can come. But we go like regular people, not like billionaires." He paused and then added, with a softness that surprised both of them, "You owe her that. You owe her the humility of arriving without your empire." Victor looked at Marcus for a long moment. Then he nodded. "The bus," he said, as if tasting a word from a language he had not spoken in 40 years. "All right, the bus." The Greyhound bus from New York to Savannah took approximately 14 hours. Victor Whitfield had not been on a bus since he was 19 years old. Riding from Detroit to Chicago with $50 in his pocket and a plan that was more ambition than strategy. He sat in the window seat because Marcus took the aisle, and for the first 3 hours, neither of them spoke. The bus smelled like vinyl and hand sanitizer and the particular brand of exhaustion that belongs to people who travel long distances in uncomfortable seats because they cannot afford any other way. Victor was wearing jeans and a plain gray shirt, clothes that Okonkwo had purchased from a department store with an expression of bewildered compliance. He looked wrong in them, the way an animal looks wrong in clothes, not because of any physical mismatch, but because the costume could not hide what was underneath. His posture was still the posture of a man who owned buildings and companies and the labor of thousands. His hands still moved with the precision of someone accustomed to directing rather than waiting. But he was trying. Marcus could see that he was trying, and the effort was worth something, even if Marcus was not ready to say so. Somewhere in Virginia, Victor began to talk. He talked about Detroit, about growing up in a neighborhood where the houses leaned against each other like tired old men. About his mother, Marcus's grandmother, a woman named Ruth Whitfield who had cleaned offices at night and sold pies on the weekends and who had told Victor every single day that he was going to be somebody. Not because she had evidence of this, but because she believed it with the kind of faith that does not require evidence. She had died when Victor was 30, 3 years before the fire, and he had never told her about Denise or the baby. That was one of his regrets, that Ruth Whitfield had a grandson she never knew about. Marcus listened. He did not interrupt. He did not ask questions. He let the story flow over him like water over stone, wearing away the edges of his resistance, not with force, but with persistence. He was learning the geography of his own history, the map of the territory he came from, and every new detail filled in a space that had been blank his entire life. A grandmother who baked pies, a father who rode buses, a mother who laughed with her whole body. These were the elements of a life he should have had, a life that had been stolen by fire and lies, and the brutal efficiency of systems that processed people like data points and discarded the ones that did not fit the form. In North Carolina, Marcus fell asleep. He did not intend to. He had been awake for 2 days, and the rhythm of the bus and the white noise of the highway and the exhaustion that comes from processing more emotion in 72 hours than he had processed in 23 years conspired to pull him under. He slept with his head tilted at an awkward angle, his neck bent against the headrest, his mouth slightly open. Victor watched him sleep. He watched the way Marcus's face softened in unconsciousness, the way the tension left his jaw and his brow, and the muscle beneath the fading cut on his cheek. In sleep, Marcus looked young. He looked his age. He looked like a 23-year-old who had been carrying a weight far too heavy for far too long. Victor reached over and adjusted the collar of Marcus's jacket, which had folded under at an angle that would leave a crease. It was a small gesture, so small that Marcus would never know it had happened, but Victor's hand shook as he did it, because it was the first fatherly thing he had done for his son in 23 years, and the smallness of it measured the vastness of everything he had missed. First words, first steps, first day of school, first scraped knee, first broken heart, first job. All of it, every milestone that a father is supposed to witness and celebrate and worry about, had happened without him, and no amount of money, no empire, no acquisition or merger or hostile takeover could undo that absence. They arrived in Savannah at 7 in the morning. The bus station was small and smelled like diesel and coffee, and the particular brand of southern humidity that wraps around you like a warm, damp towel the moment you step outside. Marcus stretched his neck and checked his phone. No messages, no missed calls. The world did not know what was about to happen, and that felt right. This was not a moment for audiences. This was a moment for a son and a mother and a door that had been closed for 23 years. Victor had booked a motel room, not a hotel, a motel, on Marcus's insistence, and they checked in and showered and changed clothes. Marcus put on his blue Oxford shirt. He buttoned it carefully. He tucked it in. He checked himself in the bathroom mirror. The cut on his cheek had faded to a thin line that was barely visible. His eyes were red from lack of sleep, but steady. He looked like a man who was about to do something that terrified him, and the only sign of that terror was the way he kept checking his collar, straightening it, adjusting it, as if the straightness of his collar could somehow prepare him for what was coming. The house was on a quiet street on the east side of Savannah, a neighborhood of small bungalows with porches and chain-link fences and yards where things grew with the determined optimism of plants that did not know they were in a poor neighborhood. The house was painted yellow, a yellow house. Marcus stared at it from across the street and felt something move inside his chest that he could not name. It was not happiness. It was not sadness. It was not anger or fear or hope. It was something older than all of those things, something that existed before language, before thought, before the ability to categorize and file and organize experience into manageable boxes. It was the feeling of coming home to a place you have never been. "You don't have to do this alone," Victor said from beside him. He was standing with his hands in the pockets of his unfamiliar jeans, looking at the yellow house with an expression that was equal parts hope and dread. "I can come with you, or I can wait here. Whatever you need." "Wait here," Marcus said. "This part is mine." He crossed the street. The gate in the chain-link fence squeaked when he opened it. The walkway was cracked concrete with grass growing through the seams. The porch had a rocking chair and a pot of geraniums that were past their peak but still showing color. The front door was brown with a brass knocker shaped like a lion's head. Marcus raised his hand and knocked 3 times. The sound was louder than he expected, or maybe the world had gone so quiet that any sound would have seemed loud. Footsteps inside. The sound of a television being muted. The click of a deadbolt. The door opened. A woman stood in the doorway. She was in her mid-40s, brown skin, dark eyes. Her hair was pulled back in a wrap, and she was wearing a floral housecoat and slippers. Her right hand held the door, and on that hand, on the back of it near the knuckles, was a scar. A cooking burn scar. Marcus saw it immediately. It was the detail Victor had mentioned at the lunch, the detail that had cracked the first fissure in the wall between them. The woman looked at Marcus. She did not recognize him. How could she? The last time she had seen him, he was 5 months old. A baby wrapped in a hospital blanket. A baby she had fought for and lost and never stopped searching for. In the faces of young men on the street, in the aisles of grocery stores, in the waiting rooms of government offices. She looked at him with the polite caution of a woman who did not know why a young man in a pressed blue shirt was standing on her porch at 9 o'clock in the morning. "Can I help you?" she asked. Her voice was warm and tired, and carrying the particular melody of a woman who had spent her life helping other people and had learned to offer help as a reflex, the way some people offer handshakes or smiles. The sound of her voice entered Marcus's ears and traveled through his body like an electrical current, reaching places that had never been touched, waking nerves that had never fired. He had never heard his mother's voice before, and now he was hearing it, and it sounded like the word home. "My name is Marcus," he said. His voice was steady but thin, pulled taut like a wire between two poles. "Marcus James Cole. I was born on March 14, 2003, in Detroit, Michigan. There was a fire on Myrtle Street in September of that year. I was told my mother died in that fire. I was told I was an orphan. I grew up in foster care." He paused. His eyes were burning. Not with tears, not yet, but with the effort of holding them back. "My mother's name was Denise Elaine Cole." The woman's hand released the door. It swung wider, revealing a hallway behind her, with a small table and a vase of flowers and a framed photograph on the wall that Marcus could not see clearly, but that seemed to show a baby. Her other hand came up to her mouth. She pressed her fingers against her lips, and behind those fingers, her mouth was making shapes, forming words that could not find their way past her hand. Her eyes, those dark eyes that were the same shape as Marcus's eyes, the same shape as Victor's eyes, went wide and then wider, and then began to fill with water. "Marcus," she whispered. The name came through her fingers like smoke through a screen, thin and fragile and carrying the weight of 23 years of grief. Oh my God, Marcus." She said his name 3 times, each time louder, each time more real, as if the repetition was the only way to convince herself that the young man standing on her porch was not a dream and not a ghost, and not one of the 1,000 imaginary reunions she had played out in her mind during the sleepless nights that had filled the years since she lost him. She reached for him. Her hands found his face. She cupped his cheeks in her palms, and her fingers were warm and shaking, and Marcus felt the touch travel through his skin and into his bones and down to the place where all the empty spaces lived, the spaces that foster homes and bus rides and cold apartments and peanut butter crackers had never been able to fill. Her hands held his face the way you hold something precious that you thought was lost forever, with a tenderness so fierce it bordered on desperation. "My baby," she said. "My baby, my baby. They told me you were adopted. They told me your file was sealed. They told me I would never find you. I tried, Marcus. I tried for years. I went to every office. I wrote every letter. I called every number. Nobody would help me. Nobody would listen. They said I was dead. My own death certificate. How do you fight a piece of paper that says you don't exist?" Marcus's wall broke. The wall he had been building since the age of awareness. The wall constructed from silence and stillness and the refusal to show weakness. The wall that had kept him upright through 12 foster homes and 100 indignities and 1,000 mornings when he woke up alone and had to convince himself that alone was livable. That wall cracked from top to bottom, and through the crack came everything he had stored behind it. 23 years of loneliness. 23 years of pretending that he was fine. 23 years of watching other children get picked up from school by mothers who knew their names. He folded. Not collapsed. Folded. The way a man folds when the thing holding him rigid is suddenly removed and gravity is allowed to do its work. He leaned forward into his mother's arms and she caught him. This woman who was smaller than him by a full head. This woman who worked at a community health clinic and lived in a yellow house in Savannah. This woman who had spent 23 years searching for a baby who grew into a man she did not recognize on her doorstep. She caught him and held him, and they stood on the porch in the morning sun. 2 people made of the same blood and the same bone, reunited by a briefcase left in a car and a billionaire's restless guilt, and the stubborn, unbreakable insistence of a young man who would not open something that did not belong to him. Across the street, Victor Whitfield stood with his hands still in his pockets and watched. He did not approach. He did not announce himself. He stood on the cracked sidewalk of a neighborhood that was nothing like the penthouse suites and private dining rooms he inhabited. And he watched his son and the mother of his son find each other on a porch in Georgia. And the tears that ran down his face were silent and numerous, and he did not wipe them away. Because for once in his life, he was not worried about being seen. Denise brought Marcus inside. The house was small and clean and smelled like coffee and the faint ghost of bacon from breakfast. The living room had a couch with a crocheted blanket draped over the back, a television on a stand, and a wall of photographs. Marcus stopped in front of the photographs. There were pictures of Denise and a man who must have been George, her husband. Pictures of the health clinic where she worked. Pictures of church gatherings and neighborhood cookouts. And in the center of the wall, in a simple wooden frame, a photograph of a baby in a hospital blanket. Marcus did not need to ask who it was. He was looking at the only picture of himself as an infant that existed in the world. "I carried that photo everywhere," Denise said from behind him. Her voice was thick with the effort of holding herself together. "Every shelter I slept in, every office I went to, every courtroom. I showed it to anyone who would look. Have you seen this baby? This is my son. His name is Marcus. Can you help me find him?" Most people looked away. Some people were kind but couldn't help. A few people tried to help but ran into the same walls I did. Dead woman seeking custody. The system didn't know what to do with me. She sat down on the couch and patted the cushion beside her. Marcus sat. The couch was soft and worn, the kind of couch that had absorbed years of conversations and television evenings and Sunday naps. It held him differently than any furniture in his apartment. It held him like it was glad he was there. "I need to tell you about the fire," Denise said. Her hands were in her lap, and she was twisting her fingers together the way people do when they are about to say something that costs them to say. "I need you to know the truth, because the truth is the only thing I have that I can give you right now." She paused and took a breath so deep her shoulders rose and fell visibly. "Raymond Lowell set that fire. The landlord. He was a terrible man, Marcus, mean and petty and dangerous. I was 2 months behind on rent because I was on maternity leave, and the money Victor sent through his lawyer was barely enough to cover formula and diapers. Lowell threatened to evict me. He came to the apartment and screamed at me in front of the neighbors. He kicked the door so hard it cracked." She stopped. Her eyes were focused on something in the middle distance, a point in the air between them, where the past and the present overlapped. "I told him I would pay when I could. I told him I had a baby. I begged him. But begging a man like Raymond Lowell was like begging a stone. He didn't hear it. He didn't care. And then, 3 weeks later, the fire. It started in the basement. Gas. The building went up so fast we barely had time to get out. I grabbed you from the crib and ran for the door, but the hallway was already full of smoke. I couldn't see. I couldn't breathe. I wrapped you in the blanket and held you against my chest and tried to find the stairs." Her voice faltered. Marcus reached over and took her hand. It was the first time he had voluntarily touched another person in longer than he could remember. Her hand was warm and small and strong, the hand of a woman who had spent her life working, lifting, holding, carrying. She squeezed his fingers and continued. "I passed out in the stairwell, the smoke. When I woke up, I was in the hospital, burns on my arms and back. They told me 2 people had died, a man on the 1st floor and a woman on the 3rd. They told me my baby had been found alive by a neighbor who heard crying. They told me you were safe. But then the painkillers, the surgeries, the skin grafts. I was in the hospital for 4 months, and when I finally got out, I discovered that the woman who died on the 3rd floor had been identified as me. My death certificate had been filed. My baby had been placed in foster care, and I had no way to prove I was alive." She paused again, and the pause was filled with the kind of anger that has aged beyond heat into something colder and harder, like lava that has cooled into stone. "I found out later that Lowell had connections in the city. He knew people in the building department. People in the insurance office. The misidentification wasn't an accident, Marcus. It was convenient. For Lowell, for the insurance company, for the city that didn't want to investigate a fire in a poor neighborhood when there were bigger problems to deal with. My death was convenient for everyone except me and you. Marcus sat with this. He sat with the image of his mother, burned and broken, stumbling out of a hospital into a world that had declared her dead. He sat with the image of her standing in government offices, holding a photograph of a baby, being told that she did not exist. He sat with the understanding that the system he had grown up in, the system of forms and files and foster homes, had been the same system that kept his mother away from him. Not through malice, through indifference, through the crushing, mechanical, soul-destroying indifference of institutions that process people like paper. "I'm here now," Marcus said. The words were inadequate. He knew they were inadequate. 3 words could not bridge 23 years. But they were the words he had, and he offered them the way he offered everything, plainly, honestly, without decoration. "I'm here, and I'm not leaving." Denise broke then, not quietly, not politely. She broke the way a dam breaks, with a sound that was part sob and part scream and part the 23-year-old cry of a woman who had been told her baby was gone and had refused to believe it and had been punished for that refusal at every turn. She pulled Marcus against her and held him with a strength that surprised him, a strength that came from somewhere deeper than muscle, from the place where mothers keep the love they cannot deliver and the grief they cannot express and the hope they cannot justify. George Matthews came home from his shift at the bus depot to find his wife sobbing on the couch with a young man he had never seen before. He was a large, quiet man with gentle eyes and hands that were permanently marked by grease and work. He stood in the doorway of his own living room and took in the scene with the patient confusion of a man who understood that he was walking into the middle of something larger than he could immediately comprehend. Denise looked up at him, her face streaked with tears, and said 2 words, "My son." George did not ask questions. He crossed the room, sat down on the arm of the couch, and placed one hand on Denise's shoulder and the other on Marcus's. It was a gesture of such simple, unrehearsed kindness that Marcus felt something inside him shift again. Another wall cracking, another door opening to a room he had not known existed. This man, this bus driver in work clothes and scuffed boots, had just been told that his wife's lost child was sitting on his couch, and his response was not shock or suspicion or territorial unease. His response was a hand on a shoulder, a steady presence, a quiet declaration that whatever this was, he was part of it. "There's someone else," Marcus said after a while. He was looking at the floor. His shoes, the polished black shoes of a hotel valet, looked strange against the worn carpet of this living room. Objects from one world placed in another. Outside, across the street, the man who, my father, my biological father, he came with me. He's been waiting. Denise's face changed. The softness drained from it, replaced by something harder, sharper, the expression of a woman who had been abandoned by a man during the most vulnerable time of her life and had survived that abandonment and everything that followed without his help. "Victor," she said, and the name in her mouth was not a name. It was an indictment. "He didn't know," Marcus said, and he said it carefully, measuring each word, because he was not defending Victor, and he was not attacking him. He was presenting evidence. He was told we both died in the fire. He paid for the burial. He visited the graves. He's been living with that for 23 years. He found me by accident. I work at a hotel where he was staying. He saw my employee file, my birthday, my birthplace, your name. That's how he found me." Denise was quiet, the kind of quiet that is not empty, but full of calculations and memories and the complex mathematics of forgiveness and resentment that every abandoned woman carries like a second heartbeat. She looked at Marcus. She looked at George. She looked at the wall of photographs where the picture of baby Marcus held its place of honor among the evidence of the life she had built without the man who should have been there. "He's outside?" she asked, and her voice was controlled now, the voice of a woman who had learned to manage her emotions the way a surgeon manages a scalpel, with precision and purpose and the understanding that one wrong cut could cause irreparable damage. "Across the street," Marcus said. "I told him to wait. I told him this part was mine." Denise stood up. She straightened her housecoat. She adjusted her hair wrap. She looked at George, who gave her a nod that contained entire conversations. The nod of a man who trusted his wife completely and would stand behind whatever she decided. Then she walked to the front door, opened it, and stepped onto the porch. Victor was standing where Marcus had left him. He had not moved. He was standing on the sidewalk in his department store jeans and his gray shirt, looking at the yellow house the way a man looks at a church, with the uncomfortable reverence of someone who knows they do not deserve to enter. When the door opened and Denise stepped out, he flinched. It was a small movement, barely perceptible, the kind of flinch that happens when a nerve that has been dead for decades suddenly comes alive. They looked at each other, across the width of a small yard and a chain-link fence, and 23 years of choices made and not made, truths told and not told, lives lived in parallel without touching. Denise at 22, fierce and pregnant and alone. Denise at 45, scarred and resilient, and standing on the porch of the life she had built with her own hands. Victor at 24, ambitious and terrified and running from responsibility. Victor at 57, powerful and broken, and standing on a sidewalk in Savannah in borrowed jeans. "Denise," he said, and the word traveled across the yard like a paper airplane, fragile and improbable and somehow arriving exactly where it was aimed. "I am so sorry. For everything. For all of it, for then and for every day since." Denise looked at him for a long time, long enough for a car to pass on the street behind him, long enough for a bird to land on the fence, consider the situation, and fly away, long enough for the morning sun to shift and change the quality of the light on her face, revealing the lines that time and hardship had drawn there, the lines that were also a map of her survival. "You're sorry," she said, and the words were flat and heavy, coins dropped on a counter. 23 years, 12 foster homes for our son. You're sorry." She shook her head slowly. "Sorry is a word, Victor. It's a sound people make with their mouths. I've heard it from social workers and judges and clerks and landlords. Sorry doesn't raise a child. Sorry doesn't keep the lights on. Sorry doesn't fight a system that says you're dead when you're standing right in front of them." Victor took it. He absorbed every word the way a boxer absorbs body shots, leaning into the blows because blocking them would be dishonest. He did not defend himself. He did not explain. He did not offer context or qualification or the dozens of reasons and circumstances that had shaped his choices. He stood there and took it because it was owed, and because the woman delivering it had earned the right to deliver it through suffering that made his grief look like a footnote. "You're right," he said. "You're right about all of it. I have no defense. I have nothing to offer except the truth, which is that I was a coward when you needed me to be brave, and I was absent when you needed me to be present. And I am standing here now not because I have any right to be here, but because our son has the integrity that I lacked, and he led me here. And I am asking you, not for forgiveness, because I don't think I've earned that, but for the chance to begin doing something, anything, to address the damage I helped cause." The porch was quiet. The morning sounds of the neighborhood, a lawnmower starting up somewhere, children laughing in the yard down the block, the distant hiss of traffic filled the space around the silence between them. Denise stood with her arms crossed over her chest, her chin tilted slightly upward, and Marcus, watching from the doorway behind her, saw in her posture the same stubbornness that he carried in his own body, the same refusal to bend, the same iron core that no amount of fire or bureaucracy or betrayal had been able to melt. "Come inside," Denise said finally. It was not warmth. It was not forgiveness. It was a door opened exactly wide enough for one person to pass through, and it would close again if the person passing through did anything to prove they did not deserve the opening. "Come inside and sit down. We have a lot to talk about, and you're going to listen more than you talk. For once in your life, Victor Whitfield, you are going to sit down and listen." Victor walked through the gate. He walked up the cracked concrete path. He climbed the 3 porch steps. He passed Denise without touching her, without reaching for her, understanding instinctively that touch was not his to initiate. He entered the yellow house and sat down on the couch next to his son, and for the next 6 hours, he listened. He listened to Denise tell the story of the fire, the hospital, the burns, the years of fighting the system. He listened to Marcus tell the story of 12 foster homes, the Hendersons, Mrs. Abernathy, the crackers and peanut butter, the shoes with holes, the aging out with nothing. He listened to George talk about the woman he had met at a bus stop in 2008, a woman with scars on her arms and a photograph of a baby in her wallet, who had told him on their first date that she was a dead woman looking for her son, and how he had fallen in love with her precisely because of the impossibility of her situation and the refusal to stop fighting that made her unlike anyone he had ever known. Victor listened to all of it. He did not interrupt. He did not offer solutions or money or the vast resources of his empire. He sat on the worn couch in the small living room of a yellow house in Savannah and absorbed the full accounting of the cost of his absence. And when they were done, when the stories had been told and the tears had been shed, and the silence had settled over them like dust after an earthquake, Victor Whitfield did something he had not done in decades. He said 5 words that he meant with every cell of his body. "What can I do now?" he asked. Not what should I do, not what will I do, what can I? The question of a man who understood, finally, that the answer was not his to decide. The answer belonged to the people he had failed. "You can start," Denise said, "by finding Raymond Lowell and making sure he answers for what he did. Not with your money, not with your lawyers, with the truth. You find the evidence and you bring it to the district attorney, and you let the law do what it should have done 23 years ago." Marcus looked at his mother. He looked at the fire in her eyes, the same fire that had survived an actual fire and burned steadily through 2 decades of injustice. Then he looked at Victor, at the man who had thrown keys at his face 4 days ago and was now sitting on a second-hand couch in a borrowed shirt, being given orders by a woman in a housecoat. And Marcus felt something he had not felt in a very long time, possibly ever. He felt like he was exactly where he was supposed to be. Not because the pain was gone, not because the 23 years could be erased, but because the truth, however late, however painful, had finally arrived, and the people it belonged to were all in the same room. 4 months later, Raymond Lowell was arrested at his home in a suburb outside Detroit. The charges were arson, fraud, reckless endangerment resulting in death, and falsification of government records. Victor Whitfield's investigators, working with a retired detective who had never been satisfied with the original investigation, had uncovered documents that connected Lowell to a scheme involving falsified building inspections, fraudulent insurance claims, and payments to a city clerk who had processed the death certificates without proper verification. The evidence was overwhelming. Lowell's attorney advised him to negotiate a plea. Lowell refused, insisting he had done nothing wrong, and went to trial. The trial lasted 3 weeks. Marcus sat in the courtroom every day. He took unpaid leave from the hotel, and Mr. Pratt, who had been informed of the situation by the hotel manager, who had been informed by forces above him that Marcus Cole was to be treated with a new and specific kind of respect, granted the leave without a word. Marcus sat in the 3rd row of the gallery and watched as the prosecution laid out the case, piece by piece, document by document, witness by witness. He watched as Lowell sat at the defense table, a 71-year-old man in a suit that did not fit well, looking at the wall as if it held an exit that no one else could see. Denise testified on the 5th day. She walked to the witness stand in a blue dress and flat shoes, her scars visible on her arms, because she had decided, she told Marcus the night before, that she was done hiding them. She had been hiding her scars for 23 years, covering them with long sleeves and bracelets in the practiced avoidance of anyone who stared too long. She was done. Let them see. Let them see what Raymond Lowell's greed had done to her body. Let them see the price she had paid for being poor in a building owned by a man who valued his insurance money more than human lives. She told her story. The courtroom was silent. The jury, 12 citizens of Detroit who had been selected through the usual process of voir dire and challenge, sat in their box and listened with the particular intensity of people who are hearing something that will stay with them for the rest of their lives. Denise's voice did not waver. It was the voice of a woman who had rehearsed this testimony not in a lawyer's office, but in her own mind, every night for 23 years, waiting for the day someone would finally ask her to tell it. When she described the moment she was told her son had been found alive, but that she could not have him back, a woman in the jury wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. When she described the years of sleeping in shelters while fighting the system for custody of a child the system had lost track of, a man in the gallery stood up and walked out because he could not listen anymore. When she described the day she was told her file had been sealed and she would never find her son, the defense attorney looked at his hands and did not object to anything. Raymond Lowell was convicted on all counts. The judge, a woman named Honorable Patricia Simmons, who had presided over the bench for 18 years and had seen the full spectrum of human misconduct, sentenced him to 22 years in federal prison. 22 years. 1 year for each year that Marcus and Denise had been separated by his crime. The judge said this explicitly. She said it while looking directly at Lowell, and then she looked at Marcus and Denise, who were sitting side by side in the gallery, and she said that no sentence could repair what had been done, but that the court recognized the magnitude of the harm and was determined to ensure that the perpetrator understood the consequences of his actions. Outside the courthouse, on the steps, in the gray November light of a Detroit afternoon, Marcus stood with his mother on one side and his father on the other. Victor had attended every day of the trial. He had sat in the back row. He had not spoken to anyone. He had not used his name or his influence. He had simply been present day after day in the unremarkable clothes of an unremarkable man, watching justice arrive 23 years late but arriving nonetheless. On the courthouse steps, Denise reached for Marcus's hand. Marcus took it. Then, after a pause that contained an entire negotiation conducted without words, Marcus reached for Victor's hand. Victor took it. And the three of them stood there, connected for the first time, a family stitched together from loss and time and the refusal to stop looking for the truth. 6 months after the trial, Marcus moved to Savannah. He rented an apartment 4 blocks from the Yellow House. He got a job at a garage, working on engines, which was what he had always wanted to do and what he would have done years ago if anyone had asked him what he wanted instead of telling him what was available. He was good at it. He was patient with machines the way he was patient with everything, giving each engine the attention it needed, diagnosing problems with the quiet focus of a man who had spent his life listening for the thing that was wrong and figuring out how to make it right. He ate dinner at the Yellow House 3 nights a week. Denise cooked. She could cook now, had learned over the years, though she still made scrambled eggs and toast on Sunday mornings, because that was what she had made when Marcus was a baby, and the tradition had survived everything else. George sat at the head of the table and told stories about the bus routes and the passengers and the particular absurdity of public transportation in a city that did not invest enough in it. They were a family, not a traditional one, not the kind that forms in the usual way, but a family nonetheless, assembled from broken pieces and held together by the understanding that broken things, properly repaired, are often stronger than things that were never broken at all. Victor came to visit once a month. He flew to Savannah on commercial flights, not private jets, because Marcus had made it clear that the terms of their relationship did not include the machinery of wealth. He stayed at a hotel, a modest one, and he came to dinner at the Yellow House and sat at the table like a guest who was slowly, carefully, earning the right to feel at home. Denise was civil to him, not warm, not cold, civil. She spoke to him directly and honestly, and without the polished courtesy that most people offered billionaires. She told him when he was wrong. She told him when he was trying too hard. She told him when he was not trying hard enough. Victor took it all. He took the corrections and the boundaries and the measured distance that Denise maintained. He took Marcus's refusal of money, of job offers, of the penthouse apartments and sports cars and investment portfolios that Victor wanted to provide and that Marcus would not accept. He took the understanding that fatherhood, real fatherhood, could not be purchased or fast-tracked or acquired through a hostile takeover of someone else's autonomy. It had to be built, slowly, honestly, One dinner at a time, one conversation at a time, one Sunday morning of scrambled eggs and toast at a time. At the hotel in Manhattan, Deshaun got into community college. He called Marcus on a Tuesday to tell him, his voice so bright with excitement that Marcus could feel the warmth of it through the phone. "I'm in, man," Deshaun said. "Engineering program. Starts in January. Full scholarship. Can you believe it? They said my essay was the best one they received." He paused. "I wrote about you, you know. About the briefcase. About what you did and what it meant. About integrity being the thing you practice when nobody's watching. My advisor said it made her cry." "Made her cry, Marcus? I made an admissions advisor cry with an essay about a parking valet. That's gotta be a first." Marcus smiled. A real smile. Not the twitch, not the almost. A full, unguarded smile that changed the geography of his face and made him look, for a moment, like the young man he should have been all along. A young man with a mother who cooked for him, and a father who was learning to show up, and a friend who wrote essays about integrity and made admissions advisors cry. On a Friday evening in April, nearly a year after the night Victor Whitfield threw his car keys at a valet's face, Marcus sat on the porch of the yellow house in Savannah with a cup of coffee in his hands. The geraniums in the pot by the door were blooming again, red and bright and stubbornly alive. The rocking chair creaked softly as he moved in it. Inside, Denise was on the phone with a patient from the clinic, her voice carrying through the screen door with the steady, reassuring cadence of a woman who had made healing her life's work. George was in the kitchen, humming a hymn Marcus did not know the name of, but that sounded like something Mrs. Abernathy might have hummed. All those years ago, in a kitchen that smelled like cornbread. Marcus reached into his pocket and pulled out a business card. It was worn and soft from handling, the same card David Okonkwo had left in his locker at the Grand Monarch Hotel. He turned it over and looked at the handwriting on the back. "Call when you are ready." He thought about readiness, about all the times in his life he had been thrown into situations he was not ready for and had survived them anyway. About the 12 foster homes and the keys thrown at his face, and the briefcase he did not open, and the mother he found on a porch in Georgia, and the father who was learning, slowly and imperfectly, to be present. He put the card back in his wallet, behind his new driver's license and his garage employee ID. Then he picked up his coffee and drank. The evening air was warm and carried the smell of jasmine from the neighbor's yard and the distant sound of children playing somewhere down the block. The coffee was good. Not expensive, not brewed from beans that cost more than a day's wage. Just good, honest, homemade coffee, prepared in a kitchen where someone loved him. He drank it slowly, letting the warmth settle into his chest. For the first time in his life, the warmth stayed. Thank you for staying until the end. If you enjoyed the story, please support the channel with a like. Take care.